Hi girls! This is Miss Gaska. Welcome back. Today we're going to go over English 1 Semester 1 Week 1 Activity 1.5 Defining Experiences. The learning targets for this activity are to explain how a writer creates effects through the connotations of words and images, and uses textual details to support interpretive claims. Our learning strategies are going to be guided reading, close reading, marking the text, note-taking, visualizing, and word map. Okay? So for this activity, you will read a short story and note any words or phrases that create imagery and voice. Now, I know it says that it's a short story, but a short story doesn't necessarily mean it's going to seem short to you. The word short is subjective, meaning it means something different to each person. What this person means by a short story is that it's not a novel, it's not a book, it's just a story. So even though it may seem a little bit long, yes, it is a short story. Yes, I do want you to read and annotate the whole thing, even though it may take you a little bit because it is quite a long piece. I would suggest doing this over the course of a few days, just because I know that you might get bored reading the piece and need to take a break. That's perfectly fine. That's why this week only has 3 activities in it, so that you could take a few days to work on this particular one. So what we're going to do is we're going to read this short story, note any words or phrases that create imagery and voice. Now remember from the last lesson that imagery is a description that uses figurative language and descriptive words in order to create an appeal to your senses, like sight, touch, sound, smell, taste. Whereas voice is like the unique way that the author uses diction, syntax, and imagery in order to write and convey their message. So, we're going to start off with setting a purpose for reading. Now, like I always say, setting a purpose for reading is the most important part of any of your springboard activities because it tells us how to annotate when we're reading. Now, sometimes I say, hey, we need to annotate the text, but you might be a little bit confused about, well, what do I annotate? I don't know when I should use these markings. I don't know when I should react to the text. Well, setting a purpose for reading guides that. It tells you what to be looking for specifically in order to complete that assignment well, okay? So we are going to be annotating in the following ways. We're going to be writing an exclamation point next to words or phrases that create interesting imagery. Now remember, imagery is the 5 senses, okay? And figurative language. So exclamation point next to words or phrases that create interesting imagery. We're going to highlight words or phrases that create the narrator's voice, meaning something that seems really unique to this narrator based on the patterns of their style. And then we're going to circle unknown words or phrases. Try to determine the meaning by using context clues, word parts, or a dictionary. Now, these words here on the side are going to be very, very, very important because not only are you going to see them throughout your high school career within your English class, but they're also going to be on your final exams over and over again. So juxtaposition is the arrangement of 2 or more things for the purpose of comparison. So usually it's something that really stands out against one another, like a diamond in the dirt would be an example of juxtaposition because you have 2 things that are so different that they make each other stand out. And a flashback is an interruption or transition to a time before the current events in a narrative. They use that technique in stories, they use it in movies. Whenever the character or narrator is looking back in time to show us something that happened previously, that's called a flashback, okay? So I'm going to do the first couple paragraphs with you just to get you started and give you examples on how to do everything. And then I'm going to set you free to read the rest of the piece. And then you could meet me up again in this video to go over the questions together, and I'll explain to you how to answer them. So, starting from the beginning, when I think of the hometown of my youth, all that I seem to remember is dust. The brown, crumbly dust of late summer. Arid, sterile dust that gets into the eyes and makes them water. Gets into the throat and between the toes of bare brown feet. I don't know why I should remember only the dust. Surely there must have been lush green lawns and paved streets under leafy shade trees somewhere in town. But memory is an abstract painting. It does not present things as they are, but rather as they feel. And so, when I think of that time and that place, I remember only the dry September of the dirt roads and grassless yards of the shanty town where I lived. And one other thing I remember, another incongruency of memory, a brilliant splash of sunny yellow against the dust. Miss Lottie's marigolds. Okay, so I'm already seeing some of this juxtaposition happening. I'm already seeing some vivid imagery, some examples of the author's voice. So I'm going to go ahead and add a few things. So here, I have an example of vivid imagery where it says the brown crumbly dust. To me, that really stands out, so I'm going to add my exclamation point there. And if you want this to stand out a little bit more, you could feel free to change the text color. I think you have to probably play around with the different settings on Foxit, but you can do that if you want to. That gets into the eyes and makes them water, like that's pretty vivid too. I think that that really stands out. Gets into the throat and between the toes of bare brown feet. So she's describing like the way it feels in your eyes and your toes. So we see a lot of vivid imagery there. And then I think that this kind of sounds like her voice because she's reflecting on her own thoughts, where it says, I don't know why I should remember only the dust. So I'm going to highlight that because I think that that shows voice. And I think she also is using this here. Memory is an abstract painting. It does not present the way things are as they are, but rather how they feel. So I think that that's pretty vivid too. I think that that's part of the way that she writes. So an abstract painting would be like something, one of the paintings that you see that doesn't really look like something, but it causes you to like think about things in a different way or feel them through the way the painter uses different kinds of textures or colors. So it also talks about the dirt roads and grassless yards. That's pretty vivid imagery. And then here we have an example of juxtaposition, so I'm going to highlight it. She says, a brilliant splash of sunny yellow against the dust. Miss Lottie's marigolds. So we also have up here lush green lawns and paved streets under shady trees. This is also an example of juxtaposition because she's comparing the other parts of town that have those things with how her life is, which is very dusty and dirty. Now, shantytown is the word that they've given you to look at here, and they give you the definition on this side, a rundown town in which most of the people are poor. Basically where the houses are falling apart, where things are just like, they're not very well made, everybody's really poor. And I think that there are a few words that we probably don't know in this paragraph, so I'm going to go ahead and circle some that may be unfamiliar. We have arid here. You probably know sterile, I'm guessing. We also have lush. I don't know if you know lush. And incongruency will be the last one that I circle. And so those are just some of the words that I'm pointing out that you may or may not know. And then I'm going to go on to the next paragraph. So whenever the memory of those marigolds flashes across my mind, a strange nostalgia comes with it and remains long after the picture has faded. I feel again the chaotic emotions of adolescence, elusive as smoke, yet as real as the potted geranium before me now. Joy and rage and wild animal gladness and shame become tangled together in the multicolored skein of 14 going on 15. That, as I recall, that devastating moment when I think suddenly, more woman than child, years ago in Miss Lottie's yard. I think of those marigolds at the strangest times. I remember them vividly now as I desperately pass away the time. So I gave a few words that you may not know: elusive, geranium, scheme, and I'm going to, and nostalgia. And I'm going to go in and I'm going to add my exclamation points where there are vivid images. So she says, yet as elusive as smoke, yet as real as the potted geranium before me now. So she gives an image there. She also says joy and rage and wild animal gladness and shame. That's pretty descriptive. Even though it doesn't necessarily appeal to our senses, we can very much imagine it. And I'm also going to point out that we have a piece of juxtaposition here with smoke, something that's elusive as smoke, yet as real as the geraniums. Now, I don't know if you know this, but a geranium is a plant. It's a flower. So comparing smoke to plant is a bit of a juxtaposition because they're so different, okay? So here, this kind of tells us that she's about to do a flashback, because she says, I remember them vividly now as I desperately pass away the time. So flashback begins at this point, okay? So now you'll do the rest of the paragraphs, which goes for a few pages. But it's absolutely necessary that you read so that you can answer the questions correctly and fully. So for number 1, it says, in the first paragraph, what 2 images does the narrator juxtapose for contrast? What are the connotations of those juxtaposed images? So you have 2 things to answer, and make sure that you're using evidence from your text. You're answering what the 2 images are that the narrator juxtaposes, which, as we talked about, we already pointed those out, and then what are the connotations, meaning the feelings associated with those words? Are they positive? Are they negative? What do you think? For number 2, craft and structure, what is the meaning of amorphous in paragraph 4? So you're going to go back and look at that word amorphous and try to figure out what it means. If you can't figure it out based on the context clues, look it up, write down the meaning, and then go back and try to find what clues could have told us what amorphous means. For number 3, what did you learn about the narrator through the author's use of flashbacks? Cite text evidence to support your answer. So it wants you to know what you found out about the narrator by going back and looking at what happened when she was a child. What does that tell you about the narrator now? Number 4 says, notice in paragraph 9 the narrator uses foreshadowing. What is the effect of hinting at this hinting of events to come? Highlight other hints or foreshadowing provided by the narrator. So you're going to go back, look for examples of foreshadowing. That's when the author kind of gives you hints about what's going to happen. You're going to highlight those, and you're also going to answer the question, what is the effect of this hinting at events to come? 5 says, why are the marigolds so important to Miss Lottie, and why do the children hate them? So those are 2 questions to answer. Those are inferences that you're making based on what you read. Number 6 says, what can you infer from the text as to Lisbeth's reasons for her final act of destruction? So once again, you're making an inference. You're using textual evidence to support your inference. Craft and structure. How does the author use juxtaposition to show how Lisbeth has changed through her experience? So once again, we're going back to that term juxtaposition. You're trying to figure out where and how the author uses it in order to show the way that Lisbeth has changed as a person. I'm going to stop here, and I'm going to make a second video for this, a part 2, to go over the rest of the activity because this one is almost coming to a close. So I will see you in part 2, and until then, have a great day.